Maria stood on the sidewalk, her hands trembling around the handle of a worn suitcase, tears streaming down her face, while the mansion she'd called home for 8 years became smaller in the distance. Inside, through the tall windows, she could still see the children, the ones who called her Aunt Maria, crying, pressing their small hands against the glass. But the woman who had just destroyed her life didn't even look back. Helena Ashford stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the black woman she'd accused of theft disappear into the street like she was nothing more than trash. Before we go any further, hit that like button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We want to know how far Maria's story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Maria had been more than a nanny. She had been the heartbeat of the Ashford house, a family wrapped in wealth, but starved of warmth. For 8 years, she woke before sunrise to prepare breakfast, walked the children to school, wiped their tears, celebrated their birthdays, taught them kindness in a home that had none. The children loved her. Daniel, the oldest, would run to her after school, showing her his drawings before anyone else. Emma, the youngest, refused to sleep unless Maria sang her that old lullaby, the one Maria's own mother had sung to her decades ago in a small house on the other side of town. And Michael, the middle child, quiet and sensitive, told her secrets he never shared with his parents. But to Richard and Helena Ashford, she was invisible, a black woman who existed only to serve. Helena treated her with the kind of cold politeness reserved for furniture, useful but replaceable. Richard barely acknowledged her presence, too busy counting money to notice the woman raising his kids. Maria endured it all, not because she was weak, but because she needed the job, because she had dreams, because she believed, somehow, that hard work and loyalty would be enough. She had plans. She wanted to save money, maybe open a small catering business one day. She had notebooks filled with recipes, business ideas, sketches of logos. She kept them hidden in her small room, tucked under her mattress like precious secrets. Every morning, she would wake at 5:30, before anyone else in the house stirred. She would walk through the silent hallways, her footsteps muffled on the expensive rugs, and make her way to the kitchen. The coffee would be brewing by 6. Breakfast would be ready by 7. Fresh fruit, perfectly scrambled eggs, toast cut into triangles for the children, because that's how they liked it. She remembered the first day she arrived at the Ashford mansion. She had been so hopeful, so grateful for the opportunity. Helena had interviewed her in the formal living room, barely looking up from her phone as she asked questions. Maria had worn her best dress, had practiced her answers, had smiled even though her feet ached from walking 6 blocks from the bus stop. "You'll have your own room," Helena had said, almost as an afterthought, "in the back. And Sundays off, unless we need you." Maria had said thank you, even though the room turned out to be barely bigger than a closet, and Sundays off became a suggestion rather than a guarantee. But she stayed, because the children needed her, because Daniel would have panic attacks before school, and only Maria knew how to calm him down, breathing exercises she taught him, her hand on his back until his heart stopped racing, because Emma had nightmares and would tiptoe down the hall to Maria's room, crawling into bed beside her, whispering that she was scared, because Michael was bullied at school and came home with bruises he tried to hide, and Maria was the one who held him while he cried, who told him he was brave, who made him believe it. She was wrong about hard work being enough. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Helena's diamond bracelet, worth more than Maria made in 2 years, had gone missing. No investigation, no questions, no proof. Just Helena's voice, sharp as broken glass, echoing through the marble hallway. "It was you, wasn't it? I knew we couldn't trust someone like you in this house." Maria froze. She had been folding laundry in the hallway, Emma's favorite pink sweater in her hands. The words hit her like a physical blow. "Someone like you." The children stood at the top of the stairs, eyes wide, mouths open in shock. The youngest, Emma, started to cry. "Mrs. Ashford, I would never," Maria began, her voice shaking. "Don't lie to me." Helena's face twisted with disgust. "I want you out. Now." Richard appeared in the doorway, weak and silent. Maria looked at him, searching for even a flicker of fairness. He looked away. He always looked away. That was Richard's specialty. looking away when it mattered most. "Please," Maria whispered, her voice breaking. "I've been here for 8 years. You know me. You know I would never steal from you. I've never taken anything that wasn't mine. I've cared for your children like they were my own. Get out." The children screamed. Emma ran down the stairs, her little feet pounding on the wood, wrapping her small arms around Maria's waist. "Don't go, Aunt Maria. Please don't go. Tell them you didn't do it. Tell them." Helena pulled her daughter away, roughly, as if Maria's touch was somehow contaminated. Richard stood there, saying nothing, doing nothing, being nothing. Daniel shouted from the top of the stairs, "Dad, do something. This isn't fair." But Richard just turned and walked back into his study, closing the door behind him. The sound of that door closing was almost worse than Helena's accusation. It was the sound of cowardice, of complicity, of a man who knew the truth but chose comfort over justice. Maria was given 15 minutes to pack her things. 15 minutes to gather 8 years of her life. She moved through her tiny room like a ghost, pulling clothes from the narrow closet, grabbing her notebooks from under the mattress, stuffing everything into the same suitcase she had arrived with all those years ago. Michael appeared in her doorway, tears streaming down his face. "This isn't right," he said. "You didn't do it. I know you didn't." Maria knelt down, taking his face in her hands. "Listen to me, Michael. Sometimes bad things happen to good people. But that doesn't mean you stop being good, okay? You keep being kind. You keep telling the truth. You keep standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." He hugged her so tight she could barely breathe. "I'll miss you," he whispered. "I'll miss you too, baby. All of you." Maria walked through that gate with nothing but shame and a suitcase full of old clothes. She had no savings. She had sent most of her money back home to her mother, who was sick and couldn't work anymore. No family in the city. No backup plan. The gate closed behind her with a metallic clang that echoed in her chest. She stood on the sidewalk for a long time, not knowing where to go, not knowing what to do. People walked past her, hurrying to their own lives, not seeing her, not caring. She was invisible again. Maybe she had always been invisible. For weeks, she lived on the couches of acquaintances who pitied her but didn't believe her. She applied for jobs and saw the same hesitation in every interviewer's eyes when they asked why she'd left her last position. Accused of theft. 2 words that followed her like a shadow, like a brand, like a curse. She stayed with her friend Gloria for 3 weeks, sleeping on a couch that smelled like cigarettes and regret. Gloria was kind, but her husband wasn't. He looked at Maria with suspicion, like she might steal the silverware in the middle of the night. He made comments, little jabs disguised as jokes. "Better count the forks after she leaves. Keep your jewelry locked up." Maria felt herself shrinking, becoming smaller, quieter, less. She started apologizing for taking up space, for eating food, for existing. She would wake up in the morning, and her first thought would be, "I'm sorry." Sorry for what? For being alive, for being accused, for being black in a world that saw black women as guilty until proven innocent, and sometimes even after. Some nights, she stood on the edge of the bridge near the river, staring down at the black water, wondering if the world would even notice if she disappeared. The city lights reflected on the surface like scattered diamonds, beautiful and unreachable. The water moved slowly, almost peacefully, and for a moment she understood why people jumped. Not because they wanted to die, but because they wanted the pain to stop. And sometimes, stopping the pain and stopping the breath felt like the same thing. But something inside her refused to break. A voice, quiet but unshakable, whispered in the darkness, "They will see you again. And when they do, they'll never look down on you again." It was her mother's voice, her grandmother's voice, the voice of every black woman who had survived when the world wanted her to disappear. The voice of resilience that runs in the blood, passed down through generations like a secret weapon. Maria stepped back from the edge. She started at the bottom. She cleaned houses, scrubbed floors, worked doubles, saved every dollar like it was oxygen. She took a job cleaning office buildings at night, when the city slept and the fluorescent lights hummed their lonely song. She mopped floors in silence, her reflection staring back at her from the polished tiles. The work was hard. Her hands cracked and bled from the chemicals. Her back ached. Her knees hurt. But every night, as she cleaned, she planned. She thought. She dreamed. In those empty offices, surrounded by the desks of people who would never see her, never know her name, she began to rebuild herself. At night, after her shifts, she studied. Online courses in business management, hospitality training, financial literacy. She sat in 24-hour diners with a laptop she'd bought secondhand, nursing a single cup of coffee for hours while she absorbed everything she could about running a business. The waitress, a tired woman named Diane with kind eyes, would sometimes bring her free refills. "You working hard, honey?" "Always," Maria would reply. "That's good. That's real good. Keep going." She learned that dignity wasn't something people gave you. It was something you built yourself, brick by brick, in the ruins of what they tried to destroy. Every course she completed was a brick. Every dollar she saved was a brick. Every morning she woke up and chose to keep going was a brick. Slowly, she began offering her own service, professional household management consulting. At first, it was just her. One client, a young couple who needed help organizing their new home. Maria showed up in her best clothes, the ones she saved for interviews, and spent 3 hours teaching them systems, organization, how to treat the people who would one day work in their home. The couple was impressed. They told their friends. Then 2 clients became 5. 5 became 15. Word spread through the networks of domestic workers, then through the families themselves. People started calling her because she didn't just train their staff. She taught them respect, structure, and humanity. She showed wealthy families how to create environments where everyone, from the homeowner to the housekeeper, felt valued. Maria had a gift. She could walk into a chaotic household and see immediately what was wrong, not just with the organization, but with the culture, the communication, the respect. She would sit families down and tell them truths they didn't want to hear. If you want your home to run smoothly, you need to treat your staff like human beings. You need to learn their names. You need to say thank you. You need to pay them fairly and on time. Some families didn't like it. They wanted someone who would just train their maids to be more efficient, more invisible. Those families, Maria turned away. "I don't work with people who don't respect the work," she would say calmly. And she meant it. But many families listened. They changed, and their homes transformed. Staff stayed longer. Children grew up kinder. Houses felt warmer. Maria's reputation grew. Within 3 years, Dignity and Home became one of the most sought-after consulting firms for high-end households in the city. The name itself was a statement. Dignity and Home, because a home without dignity was just a house. And Maria was in the business of building homes. Maria traded her old uniform for tailored suits. Navy blue, charcoal gray, black with subtle pinstripes. She moved into a small but beautiful apartment in a neighborhood she used to only clean in. The first night she spent there, she sat on the floor of her empty living room and cried. Not from sadness, but from relief, from pride, from the overwhelming sense that she had survived. She walked with her head high, and every time someone tried to look down on her, she smiled, because she knew something they didn't. She was just getting started. Her business grew. She hired a team. Former nannies, housekeepers, and caregivers who she trained and empowered. Women who had been invisible their whole lives suddenly had titles, business cards, and salaries that made them weep the first time they saw the numbers. There was Patricia, a 52-year-old woman who had cleaned houses for 30 years and never once been offered health insurance. Maria hired her as senior household operations manager. There was Yolanda, a former nanny who had been fired when the family found out she was undocumented, even though she'd cared for their children for 6 years. Maria helped her get legal status and made her director family services. There was Carmen, who spoke 3 languages and had a degree from her home country that meant nothing here. Maria made her head of international client relations. Maria remembered each of their names. She remembered their stories, because she had lived their story. Every woman she hired, she told them the same thing. You are not invisible. You are not replaceable. You are valuable. And this company exists because women like us deserve more than we've been given. The team loved her. They worked hard for her because she worked hard for them. She paid them well, gave them benefits, respected their time off, celebrated their birthdays, asked about their children, their dreams, their lives. She built a company she wished had existed when she was a nanny in the Ashford house. 5 years after she was thrown out of the mansion, Maria received a call from a real estate agent named Thomas. He was young, ambitious, always looking for the next big sale. "Miss Carter, there's a property I think you'd be interested in. It's a foreclosure, a family going through financial difficulties. Beautiful estate. Prime location. They're selling fast. I know you've been looking for a property for your new headquarters, and this one, well, it's special." Maria asked for the address. Her heart stopped. It was the Ashford mansion. She sat in her office for a long time after that call, staring out the window at the city below, the city that had tried to swallow her whole and failed. She thought about that Tuesday morning, the accusation, the children's cries, Helena's cold eyes, Richard's silence, the gate closing behind her. She thought about the small room at the back of the house where she used to sleep, barely big enough for a bed, with a window that looked out onto the garbage bins. She thought about the nights Emma would crawl into that bed, seeking comfort, the mornings Daniel would knock softly, asking if she was awake yet, the afternoons Michael would sit on the floor, doing homework while she folded laundry, just wanting to be near someone who cared. And she made a decision. The day of the viewing, Maria pulled up to the gate in a black sedan, her assistant beside her, clipboard in hand. The same iron gate, the same stone pathway, the same fountain in the center of the driveway, though the water had stopped flowing. The fountain was filled with dead leaves now, brown and rotting. But now the paint was peeling, the garden overgrown, the windows dim. The house looked tired, like it had aged decades in just 5 years. The roses Helena used to be so proud of had turned wild, thorny and untamed. The grass was yellow in patches. One of the shutters hung at an angle. Helena Ashford stood in the foyer, older, thinner, her face tight with desperation as she spoke to the realtor. Her hair, once perfectly styled every single day, now showed streaks of gray and hung limp around her face. Her hands, once adorned with rings on every finger, were bare except for a simple wedding band. She wore a simple dress, expensive once, but now worn at the edges. The woman who used to change outfits 3 times a day now looked like she'd been wearing the same clothes for weeks. When Maria stepped through the door, time seemed to collapse. Helena's eyes widened. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale as paper. She gripped the banister of the staircase, as if she might fall. Maria smiled, calm, poised, untouchable. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "I'm here to see the property." Helena's hand went to her throat, as if she couldn't breathe. "You," she whispered. The word came out broken, barely audible. Maria tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Yes, me." She walked past Helena, like she was a stranger, like she was just another seller in another house, through the living room where she'd once served tea to Helena's bridge club, invisible among the laughter and gossip, through the kitchen where she'd cooked 1,000 meals, the same kitchen where Helena once criticized her for using too much salt, or not enough, or for making the eggs too soft, or too hard. Nothing was ever right. Through the hallway where she'd been accused, where her life had been torn apart with just a few words. Thomas, the realtor, rambled on about square footage, about the quality of the fixtures, about the potential of the property. Maria barely heard him. She was moving through memory, through pain, through time itself, and finally, to the small room at the back of the house, the tiny space where she used to sleep. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the walls, the same crack in the ceiling, the same narrow window, the same feeling of being forgotten. The room was empty now, dusty, abandoned, but she could still see her old bed in the corner, still see her suitcase tucked under it, still see herself sitting there late at night, writing in her notebooks, dreaming of a different life. But this time, she felt nothing but power. She turned to the realtor and said calmly, "I'll take it." Thomas, the realtor, nearly dropped his tablet. The asking price was substantial, even for a foreclosure. "Are you sure, Miss Carter? This is a significant investment. Would you like to bring in an inspector? Or perhaps your financial advisor? Or—" "I said I'll take it," Maria repeated, her eyes never leaving Helena's face. "Full asking price. Cash offer. I can have the paperwork ready by tomorrow." Helena's legs seemed to give out. She sank onto the bottom step of the grand staircase, the same staircase where her children had watched Maria being thrown out. Her hands covered her face. Maria couldn't tell if she was crying or just trying to hide. 2 weeks later, Maria stood in front of the mansion with the keys in her hand. Helena had already moved out. No goodbye. No apology. Just silence. The moving trucks had come and gone, taking with them the last remnants of the Ashford legacy. The house stood empty, waiting. Maria walked through every room, opening every window, letting light flood into the spaces that once felt like a prison. Fresh air poured in, carrying away the staleness, the memories, the ghosts. She opened windows that probably hadn't been opened in years. Dust motes danced in the sunlight. The house seemed to sigh with relief. She didn't redecorate out of revenge. She redecorated because the house deserved to breathe again. The formal living room became a library, lined with books on entrepreneurship, Black history, women's empowerment. Shelves floor to ceiling, filled with knowledge, with stories, with possibility. The dining room, where she was never allowed to sit, became a place of community, where she hosted dinners for women who worked in domestic service. The small room where she used to sleep, she turned it into her private office, a place of power. She knocked down a wall, expanding it, adding light. The narrow window now looked out onto a garden she had redesigned, filled with flowers her mother used to grow, roses and sunflowers and magnolias. The same flowers that grew outside the house where she was born, where she learned what love looked like before she came to this place, where she learned what cruelty looked like. She hung a single photograph on the wall, the only decoration in the room. It was a picture of herself from 5 years ago, standing outside the gate with her suitcase, taken by a neighbor who had felt sorry for her. The neighbor had called out, "Wait," and snapped the photo on her phone, then later tracked Maria down to give it to her. "I don't know why I took it," the neighbor had said. "I just felt like maybe you'd want to remember." Maria had kept it in a drawer for years, unable to look at it. But now she hung it in a simple black frame. She kept it there not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of transformation, as evidence that the woman she was and the woman she became were the same person, just given the chance to rise. 3 months after moving in, Maria hosted her first dinner at the mansion. She invited women from her company, women who worked as nannies, housekeepers, and caregivers. Some of them were nervous, walking into such a grand house. Some of them had never sat at a dining table like this before. They stood in the foyer, uncertain, looking around with wide eyes. Maria greeted each one at the door, hugging them, telling them they belonged here. Come in, come in. This is your home tonight." The table was set with fine china, candles, fresh flowers. She had cooked the meal herself, recipes her mother taught her, soul food that tasted like home and history. Fried chicken and collard greens and cornbread and mac and cheese and sweet potato pie. Food that told stories. Food that remembered. When everyone was seated, Maria stood at the head of the table and raised her glass. The candlelight flickered across faces, across smiles, across tears. "This house used to be a place where people like us were invisible," she said, her voice steady and strong. "We were the ones who cooked the meals, but never ate at the table. We were the ones who made the beds, but slept in the smallest rooms. We were the ones who raised the children, but were treated like we didn't matter. We were seen but not seen, needed but not valued, essential but disposable." The women nodded, some wiping tears from their eyes. Every woman at that table had a story. Every woman had been made to feel small. Tonight, Maria continued, "We are seen. We are valued. And we are home." The room erupted in applause. They ate and laughed and shared stories late into the night. Stories of mistreatment and resilience. Stories of dreams deferred and dreams realized. Stories of women who refused to be broken, who got up every morning and kept going, who raised other people's children with love even when they were treated without it. Patricia told the story of the family who docked her pay every time she was 5 minutes late, but never paid her overtime when she stayed hours past her shift. Yolanda told the story of the mother who accused her of not loving the children enough, but never once asked about Yolanda's own children back home who she hadn't seen in 3 years. Carmen told the story of being locked out of the house in the rain because she forgot her key, and the family wouldn't answer the door for 20 minutes because they were watching television. And Maria told her story: the accusation, the gate, the years of struggling, the nights on the bridge, the decision to survive, the choice to rise. She told it all, and when she finished, the room was silent except for the sound of crying. Outside, the gate that once closed on Maria now opened under her command. She had it reprogrammed, the security system, so that it recognized her car, her fingerprint, her face. The gate opened for her now. Always. 6 months after Maria bought the house, she received a letter. It was addressed to Miss Maria Carter, delivered by hand to her mailbox. The handwriting was shaky, uncertain. Inside, there was no return address. Maria, the letter began. I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you should. But I need to say this, even if you never respond. I was wrong. I was cruel. I accused you of something you didn't do. And I destroyed your life without a second thought. I found my bracelet 2 weeks after you left. It had fallen behind my dresser. I never told anyone. I was too proud, too ashamed, too cowardly. Richard and I lost everything. The business failed. The debts piled up. We lost the house. We lost everything we thought mattered. We're living in a 2-bedroom apartment now. Richard works at a car dealership. I work part-time at a department store. Everything we had is gone. My children, your children, the ones you raised with more love than I ever gave them, they barely speak to me now. They remember what I did to you. Emma asks about you all the time. She cries and asks if you're okay, if you're happy, if you hate her. I tell her no. You could never hate her. But I don't know if that's true. I don't know anything anymore. Daniel said you were the only mother figure he ever really had. He said it to my face, and I couldn't even argue because I knew he was right. Michael won't come home for holidays. He says he can't be around me, can't look at me without remembering that day. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I needed you to know the truth. You were innocent. You were always innocent. And I was the thief. Not of jewelry, but of dignity, of justice, of humanity. I stole your life for 2 weeks of my pride. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Helena. Maria read the letter 3 times. She sat in her office, in the small room that used to be her prison, now expanded and filled with light, and felt something she didn't expect. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even vindication, just a quiet, profound sense of closure. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. She didn't respond, not because she was cruel, but because Helena's apology wasn't what she needed anymore. Maria had already freed herself. She had already won, not by destroying Helena, but by rebuilding herself. Forgiveness was complicated. Maria had learned that. Some days she felt generous, understanding that hurt people hurt people. Other days she felt the old anger rise up, hot and sharp, when she remembered the children crying, the gate closing, the years of struggle. Both feelings were valid. Both feelings were true. She didn't know Helena forgiveness, but she also didn't know her hatred. She could simply let it be, let it exist in the past where it belonged. Years passed. The mansion became more than Maria's home. It became a symbol. She opened parts of it to her company, using the space for training seminars, for support groups, for community gatherings. The house that once represented oppression now represented possibility. She started a scholarship program, funding education for the children of domestic workers. She lobbied for better labor laws, better wages, better protections. She testified before the city council. She wrote op-eds in newspapers. She became a voice, not just for herself, but for all the women who had been made invisible. Daniel reached out to her one day, through LinkedIn. He was in college now, studying social work. Miss Maria, his message said, and she smiled at the formal address. I never stopped thinking about you. I never stopped being angry about what happened. I want you to know that you changed my life. You showed me what real love looks like. Can we meet for coffee? They met. He had grown so much, tall and serious, with kind eyes that reminded her of the little boy who used to tell her secrets. They talked for hours. He apologized for not doing more, for not stopping his mother. She told him he was a child, that it wasn't his responsibility. He cried. She held his hand across the table. Emma reached out too, and then Michael. One by one, the children she raised came back to her, not as children anymore, but as adults who wanted her in their lives, who called her on holidays, who invited her to graduations and celebrations, who introduced her as the woman who raised them, the woman who mattered. Maria built a life that was full and rich and meaningful. She traveled. She laughed. She loved. She found peace. Not because she forgot what happened, but because she transformed it into something powerful. One evening, years after she bought the mansion, Maria stood on the balcony, watching the sun set over the city. The sky burned orange and pink and purple, colors so vivid they seemed unreal. She thought about the girl who once cried on the sidewalk, holding a suitcase and a shattered heart. She thought about Helena, wherever she was now, and felt no anger, only peace. Only the quiet understanding that both of their lives had been changed by one moment, one accusation, one injustice. But where Helena had fallen, Maria had risen. Where Helena had been broken by pride, Maria had been forged by humility. Because revenge was never the goal. Justice was. And justice looked like this. A black woman who was told she didn't belong, now standing in a home that bore her name. A woman who was called a thief, now holding the deed. A woman who was invisible, now impossible to ignore. A woman who was broken, now unbreakable. Below, in the garden, she could hear laughter. Her team was hosting a workshop for young women entering domestic work, teaching them their rights, their worth, their power. The house was alive again, but this time with purpose, with meaning, with love. The same rooms that once echoed with coldness now rang with warmth. The same walls that once confined now protected. The same gate that once closed now opened. Maria smiled, took a sip of tea, and whispered to the wind. They thought closing the gate would be the end of my story. They were wrong. It was just the beginning. The same gate, the same mansion. But this time, the name on the mailbox read Maria Carter, owner. And inside, in every room, in every corner, in every ray of light that poured through those windows, lived proof that dignity could not be stolen, that justice could not be denied, and that a woman who rises from ashes becomes unbreakable. Maria had come home, not to the place where she was broken, but to the place where she proved that broken things, when rebuilt by their own hands, become masterpieces. The house had been transformed, and so had she. The gate that once closed on her pain now opened to her power. And somewhere in the city, in a small apartment, Helena Ashford sat with her letter unanswered, understanding finally that some doors, once closed, remain closed forever, not out of cruelty, but out of the simple truth that some people move so far forward, they can never go back. And that, perhaps, was the most powerful justice of all.